Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Business of Art, the podcast that demystifies business for artists. And I have an awesome one for you today with Vinton Heuck, who is one of the animation directors on Young Justice Season 3. Before you get into it and before you get super excited, we can't talk that much about Young Justice Season 3, but what we do is a deep dive into his career from starting out in Washington, working as a security guard, drawing in his spare time, all the way to now when he's working on Young Justice Season 3. And it's a great case study to model yourself after. But I'm a little bit irritated because Skype sent me this email that I was not able to use the old version of Skype. I had to upgrade to the new version of Skype. They were going to stop supporting it. And I thought I had run all of the tests that I needed to make it work flawlessly. But somehow the new version of Skype recorded my computer's audio instead of my mic's audio. Now, for those of you that have been listening for a while, you may know that our episode with Amanda Meadows had a similar issue. It seems that every time that I try to use a new player, a new software, or anything else to record my audio, it just blows up in my face. So, Vinton's audio is great. My audio sucks balls. I can say that, right? We're friends here. You've heard me say much worse than that. So, we're still going to do the interview. Clearly, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this episode. But just know that my audio is poo-poo dooku janks. Before we get started, I do want to invite you to our new Facebook group, Authors and Creators Making Money Selling Books. It's got over 600 people in it, and it's growing all of the time, and we love to include you as one of those people. If you are an author or a creator who wants to make more money selling books, this is the group for you. It's all killer, no filler. It's very limited promo, and it's all information and support based. And you can get there right now by heading on over to writingandsellingcommunity.com. All right, that's all the pre-show junk I got to talk about. Let's get on with the episode. Take it away, Vinton. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
Well, I'm passionate about usually whatever job I'm on, because I'm fortunate enough to be to storyboard and direct cartoons for a living. So the thing I think about mostly these days during my waking hours is Young Justice Season 3, which I got hired to direct on a couple months ago.
And can I just say that I could not be more excited for this, because it's one of the very few shows that I actually want them to revive.
Yeah, that's cool, and it's great to be on a show that has that kind of fan base and reaction, you know. And I've worked on plenty of shows where the age demographic is between 8 and 11, and they don't usually have much of a presence on social media or come up to you at cons. But when I officially announced that I was on Young Justice, I was quite impressed by just sort of the flood of, people congratulating me or expressing interest or excitement in the show. So it's neat to be part of that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I never want them to revive any show ever. I think shows should die, and then they should, new shows should grow in their place.
Yeah.
But I have I can't help it. I understand, people that want a show to be revived, because the one show is always, Young Justice. I really want Young Justice to come back, because, I felt like it ended in this, tumultuous cliffhanger that, was perfect for a next season.
Yeah, and it had such a progressive storyline, too, so, there's so, like any really good story, the characters really evolve and change, and the story moves forward in a dramatic fashion between seasons. So it gives you that feeling well, what's going to happen next? So yeah, as long as they keep doing that, I think fans are going to be clamoring for more.
I cannot wait to see what happens with Artemis in the third season.
Me too.
And other things that happen at the end that I won't spoil for people that haven't watched it, but go to Netflix and watch the first 2 seasons if you
Right,
haven't.
that's what I did. So binge
sure.
watched it. I'd sort of seen episodes here and there, and I'd actually freelanced on as a storyboard artist on a few episodes, but I had to sort of catch up on all that stuff.
So, and I know you're actually at the office right now, and I know you can't talk about the next season. So let's just stop gushing about Young Justice, and can you give us a little bit of background about like how you got to this point? So from graduating to sort of a couple of the steps to how you got where you are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I wanted to draw comic books ever since I could really just even remember, or probably ever since I first set eyes upon a comic book. And then I just sort of didn't really want to do anything else until I became aware that movies had people that made them. And then filmmaking also became something that of a strong interest with me. But then, growing up in kind of all over, but primarily in the Northwest, I had no idea how that, one could go about making a movie. But I could sit and draw all day, and, I was kind of making my own comics and stapling them together, and even trying to sell them, getting the comic book store owner to sell them at the counter, little photocopied fanzines or whatever, and that's just always what I wanted to do. And then I thought maybe somehow that could translate or move me in a direction that could include other things like filmmaking or writing. I'm always interested in writing as well, and so my plan really out of high school was to go to the Joe Kubert School of Design. And that's what I wanted to do, but I let my parents sort of convince me that would be a unwise decision, since nobody actually made a living doing comic books. So I ended up going to public college, and then university for a little bit, and then that was all going fine, and I ended up in the fine arts program at the University of Washington, and that was really the closest thing they had to the kind of art I wanted to do, which I soon discovered really wasn't fine art at all. I wanted to be a storyteller, and I wanted to draw comics. I had some interest in illustration, but it was really more like, spaceships and monsters and, stuff that was inspired by my heroes like Frazetta or N.C. Wyeth more than Matisse or any of those guys. As much as I like some of their work, it's just not really what I wanted to do. And at that point, I just felt like I was wasting my time, and I just sort of quit college, and I just walked off campus, and my goal at that point was somehow I was going to make this comic book illustrator thing work. So I got a security guard job, working graveyard shifts in the remotest locations possible with the least amount of responsibility, and use as much of that time as I could to just continuously draw. And and then for a while I collected unemployment, and I filled out the forms of like employers I was seeking work from. I would just list Marvel and DC, and I was starting to submit stuff to them, and
my always trick during that time was to when I was in unemployment was like I would submit jobs to wherever. But they would always be like jobs I was very unqualified for.
Yeah, I think I did that trick too, and I just lived as cheaply as possible. So I was living in a walk-in closet that a friend of mine rented to me so, for like a year, and then eventually I caught a break. My first paid gig, which wasn't much, but I sort of got it under the table while I continued to get unemployment, so I was sort of working it that way. It was for Now Comics on the Green Hornet, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. And all the work I did for them was terrible, but it was, my introduction into being an actual comic book illustrator. So that was pretty exciting at the time.
When was that?
That would have been, I guess, early to mid '90s. I was also sort of like, it gets, this is so long ago, so it gets a little blurry, but, I was sort of trying to pick up art jobs however I can. I just started going to, once I felt like that I might be good enough with my portfolio that I was working on, during graveyard shift hours, I started just taking it to conventions and just putting it in front of anybody. Well, not necessarily anybody that would look at it, but I would go right to the artists I admired most, and then I'd show it to them, which was incredibly terrifying experience. I showed it to people like Art Adams, like guys I really admired, and most of them were pretty cool, but their critiques, as far as I was concerned, were completely welcomed. I was there to learn, and I think that's one of the things you have to have as an artist is you have to, especially when you're learning, you have to be honest about kind of where you're at with your skills and have the willingness to work hard and improve. Because I never felt like I was like an especially gifted artist necessarily, but I did have, I think, an ability to kind of, in a somewhat dispassionate way, stand back from my work and judge it about how good or bad it was. So I think at least when I started showing it around, it was definitely not great at all, but I felt like it was serviceable enough to maybe get some work. And
right. Well, on top of that, like you wanted to iterate by talking to the people that you admire.
Yeah, and I would really take their notes too. And apply and with publishing companies as well. And they would tell me things that I would need to work on, and I would go home and I would work on those things. And I just was able to get into my first gig with Now Comics, but I also started I can't remember exactly when that happened, if that happened before or after or kind of simultaneously. Maybe it happened after, because I did 3 issues for them. I felt like maybe this was going to be like a regular gig for a while. And at the 3rd issue I did for them, it's all, you're just working in your cramped little studio for somebody that's, I can't remember where they were, back east somewhere. They weren't in Washington. And, I got paid for those first 2 issues. That 3rd issue, I just never even got paid for, and nor did it even get published, which was sad because, I really felt like with that 3rd issue, I was a huge Bruce Lee fan, and they were showing the Green Hornet on FX at that point. This is just back on cable. So I had more reference to work with, and I was really trying to nail that Bruce Lee likeness with the Kato character. That was my first real disappointment, I guess, which was not the last either, where I just slaved away on something for over a month and then never got paid for it, nor did it see the light of day. But that did eventually, but the work I did helped get me a gig with Malibu Comics, and I ended up doing like 4 or 5 Mortal Kombat comic books for them. It's hard to say where my animation stuff was fitting in between that stuff, because at one of the conventions I met this guy Rick Holberg, who's like an old veteran in the field of comics, but always kind of made most of his money in the field of animation, and his storyboarding and I don't know how much directing he did, but it goes all the way back to like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and Thunder the Barbarian. I think he might have even got his start on Super Friends. So I was a prime demographic for those shows as a child, and so I was very excited to meet him. And he was doing stuff with Mike Grell at the time, because Grell had made that deal with Image to do a book called Shaman's Tears, which sort of like fizzled after a few issues. But he was working up at Mike Grell's ranch/studio, which was really cool. And at that point, he was making tons of money because of the Image deal. And so what happened through that is, my portfolio and professional work was such that Rick took me kind of under his wing as a storyboard revisionist, or actually cleanup artist over his roughs. So I ended up kind of doing that sporadically for a while, and then that sort of actually became a somewhat steady gig at some point, and I ended up sort of shadowing him on his work. Never got credit for it officially, but I didn't care. I was totally happy to be having him pay me whatever he was going to pay me to learn the craft and get the experience. And I ended up working on like that 90s X-Men show and the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, and those were some of the high points. I almost got fired on my first one I did for him, was Garfield. And he basically said, I'll give you one more chance, and if you don't, pick up the pace on that one, then I won't be able to use you. So I think the second one was Exo Squad, and I just, killed myself, did whatever I had to do to make sure that he was going to continue to use me. So, the enthusiasm was there, and that's, that drive and enthusiasm and hard work ethic is sort of what, has brought me to where I am now. But that was all up in Washington. And then I was married at the time, which I was, probably was not something I should have done at such a young age. I was married at 22. And by the time I was 26, 27, that was kind of on its way out the door, and an opportunity came up to do some work in LA. They were looking for like in-house people, and I'd actually, even before that, I had started to pick up some freelance gigs, thanks to my connections through Rick. And so I had done a few freelance boarding jobs on my own. One of them was on a season of Mummies Alive. and basically all that, kind of opened the door enough for me to get an in-house gig down here in LA. And, since I was really, nothing else was holding me in the Northwest at that point, after my marriage failed, I was like, F it, I'll just go to LA, which I as a Northwesterner, I hated, by the way. I like LA now, but I was like, my only experiences with LA was like, and again, that was, my attempts to get work, because I started taking yearly treks down from Seattle to the Comic-Con. And I would drive through LA, and it was just, maybe it wasn't that terribly smoggy at that point, but there was actually a stint where I lived in Ventura for about a year, and I remember that was in the 80s, and we took a few trips into LA, and at that point, there was still a lot of smog alerts, and I was a Northwesterner, so what can I say? I just loved like forests and greenery, and I was all like a tree hugger, and
yeah. I mean, I think there's just also a negative perception of LA across everywhere.
There is.
So like, I'm from DC, and the Middle Atlantic like vehemently hates LA for after I moved here, no good reason. Yeah. It's just like it's all the way over there, and like it's smoggy and gross. And you're like, it kind of sometimes is those things, but that perception of LA, like I think, warps people's minds before they ever get here.
Yeah, and as it turns out, it's not that smoggy. It's actually pretty nice. It's beautiful weather. But some of that's because of the EPA and the getting rid of leaded gasoline and things they've done to help improve it. But it's great weather. I find I did have to make an adjustment. Like, I came down here in a 3-cylinder Geo, very just modest, like with what I drove, and I've never even thought twice about it. And there is a difference for sure, and that did take an adjustment for me. As far as there's a lot more, people are a lot more concerned about those type of things, what they drive. Like, there's a lot more fake boobs. There's just a lot more of that, but
there's also just a lot more people.
Yeah,
also.
Right.
I mean, that's
and there's
it's like yeah. Like there's a lot of people in like that kind of suck in LA, but there's also like more people than 42 states. So like there's a lot of people that suck other places. It's just they all like some of them end up migrating to LA.
Honestly, I love LA. LA's been great to me. But there is that side where it's a lot of people coming here that are trying to be actors, actresses, and there's that sort of ugly side, I feel, to Hollywood. But it's extremely rich and diverse culture here, which I greatly appreciate. And there's tons of interesting, creative people, and I've made a great life for myself here. Honestly,
I agree. I mean, I loved LA the minute that I sat down. I was in a neck brace when I got here, and like I got off the plane, and I was like, I literally I took it off, and I was like, I don't need this anymore.
Oh, good.
And I was like, LA healed me. So like, I totally, I appreciate what you're saying, because like I may have loved LA before you loved LA, but like, I agree. I've made a nice life here. I own property here. Like. I think the creative community here is second to none.
That's true.
And like the one thing that I love about LA, not to make this a show about why we love LA, but it's the only place I've ever lived where people don't go, "Oh, you're a writer? Yeah, but what do you really do?" And instead go, "Oh, you're a salesperson, but what do you really want to do?" Like the thing that you are like the creative thing is like the real thing, and like the job is just the means to it. Whereas everywhere else I've ever lived or ever been, the idea that like you can make a living as an artist or a writer is like, yeah, that's nice, but what are you really going to do when that doesn't work?
That's true. I guess the adjustment for me was on the other side, coming from the Northwest, was people were seemed much more concerned about what you do. Like people seemed more. Like that was a very early question that would come up in the conversation, is like, well, what do you do? Like where I felt like, where I was from, it was like people weren't necessarily as concerned about that. But then, it could be like, what do you do? Because there's a good chance you could be doing something interesting because there's so many artists and everything else here. So I don't know. So some of it was just my own probably preconceived notions and like sort of my own condescension without realizing it, and just being where.
Right. So when was that?
That was like late 90s, like 97, 98. probably 98. And the first job I got work, the first studio I got work with was Saban. And it was Will Mineo, I think, was the head. Yeah, it was Will. And Will had, I believe he produced on Exo Squad. I think he had, can't remember what his relationship was to the Spider-Man cartoon. But, so he was basically in charge of this Captain America cartoon. So that's what I got hired to work on, which, if you've not heard of a Captain America cartoon in the late 90s, is because it never saw the light of day. I worked there for a few months in-house initially, and then, I don't know, the whole thing seemed a little dicey because there was no real script, so I was just sort of making up sequences as I went along, but having a great time doing it. And eventually, they wanted me to work at home, and then there was another case where I was like working at home for at least weeks, if not a month. And then a friend of mine who was also from the Northwest and came down and got work at Disney, told me, it's like, hey, what's going on over there? I heard they canned the project. I'm like, huh? Like, I've been sitting there for 2 weeks boarding stuff, and then again, no one bothered to tell me that it was no longer happening. But they tried to put me on to keep me working, so they put me on to Silver Surfer Season 2, which there actually was a Silver Surfer Season 1, which kind of had a good intention. I think the realization of it was fairly weak, but they were trying to really go for that Jack Kirby look. The problem was the guys they had boarding on it didn't really have, they weren't really experienced action adventure guys or comic book background guys. So, the storytelling, the shots, the poses were all pretty weak. So the first thing I did was I bought the big black and white phone book edition, collected edition of all the John Buscema and Kirby Silver Surfers, and just sort of used that as my template, and was having a ball on that. And then again, it was like a couple months in, it's like, hey, everything looked great, but Silver Surfer Season 2 got canned. And I had another contact from the work I had done on the X-Men with Rick and over at Sony, which was a young studio at the time, and they were going pretty strong, and they were just desperately trying to find talent, so they were willing to take chances on younger, more inexperienced guys. And I got in working on all that late 90s Sony stuff. There's some work was done on Godzilla, which very sadly was based on the crappy 90s American Godzilla. But then I also got to work on Big Guy and Rusty, Jackie Chan Adventures, and that kept me busy for like 3 years. And then out of that, one of the guys that was directing on Jackie Chan moved over to him, and a few of the Sony guys moved over to Warner Brothers to direct on The Batman. And then I got hired as a board artist on that show, and I ended up staying there for the entire breadth of the series, which was 5 seasons and a direct-to-video. And by that 5th season, I was promoted up to director. And then the first episode I directed was a Batman-Superman team-up, it was a very happy time for me. Big fans of both those characters, and I enjoyed it. For a while it was like, I wish I was working on the Bruce Timm Batman, or the Bruce Timm Superman, and really, I guess even more in hindsight, as I look back on it, I have more appreciation for it, because it really wasn't a Batman cartoon that was being made for the same audience. They were going for the 7 to 11-year-old market. And so the stories weren't as complex or necessarily as interesting from a teenager or an adult standpoint, but it was cool. Like in more recent years, I've done teaching and speaking engagements, and or appearances at conventions even, and it has its fans. People that were at that age at that time. That's their Batman, and even my 7-year-old son, he discovered it on Netflix and sort of binge watched the whole thing. So I had fun sitting down and rewatching some of the old episodes I had boarded on or directed on with him. So I look back on it just fondly for what it was, and I got my chance to direct on that, and that the directing has pretty much continued consistently until today.
Right, and so that was it's like the tale of two halves of your career. The first half being kind of like comics and storyboarding, and the second half being more directing. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and I mean, at my heart, I've always loved comics almost more than anything. And I felt, I was starting to make some pretty good progress in that area. But it was hard once you start getting a weekly paycheck and you have medical and you've spent, the past 6 years mostly starving. Yeah, it definitely sort of shifted me more into that field, and it kind of begrudgingly for a while, because I just really wanted to be a comic book illustrator / writer, creator more than anything. With each thing I got, I felt like I was getting better. And I did a couple things through Marvel at the end, right before I've shifted full time into animation. But that's pretty much it. And then as my whole my career in animation has just been punctuated here and there with a little bit of comic book work. There's my own creator-owned project that I've been working on for years with my co-creator partner, and then there's been a little bit of comic book stuff here and there, some writing mostly for DC, but yeah, 99% of it's been all animation.
All right, so let's go back. Now I have some questions for you. Now that we've thoroughly covered your career, I want you to wipe out all of it.
Okay.
And if you could get to where you are today, if you could give yourself 3 tips to get yourself from where you started to where you are today, to kind of like cut a couple of years off of that struggle, what would you tell yourself?
That's a pretty good question. It's kind of what would I have done differently I think I don't know. It's complex in the sense that as I get older, I've been getting teaching offers and opportunities. So on the practical side, I'm kind of glad I did those regular college years, because I don't know, I guess it has to wait to see how that pans out, but that could benefit me if I need to go back to school and finish off that bachelor's degree, but I guess ideally I just would have followed my heart fully from the beginning, instead of sort of letting myself get talked into being more practical, because it's like once I stopped being practical and I just followed my passion and my dream, then that's when I started to really move in the direction I wanted to go. So that didn't happen till I was 20 years old or so, or 21. I think 22 is when I I was getting paid work as an artist, so I could call myself a professional. So yeah, I would say I would have just gone to the Joe Cooper School of Design. That's where I just would have gone there. You know?
Yeah, there's a great quote by Jim Carrey, and I'm going to bastardize it so bad, but he was talking about how his dad never followed his dreams, and he still ended up laid off and with problems and like miserable. And so he's like, even if you do what you like, if you do what you hate, you probably won't. So you might not succeed anyway. So you might as well do what you love, because at least then, if you don't succeed, you didn't succeed doing what you love.
Yeah, that's good advice, and I've seen it in my own life as well. Like with my own father, who is dear to me, but is a guy that seems to have not really gone after his dreams fully. So yeah, that's something that it's, if you have that passion and you have those dreams, you just sort of have to go after it, or because the alternative, at least the alternative to me, was it wasn't even about happiness. It was about being fulfilled, and doing something that you felt like you were meant to be doing, that you're put here to do.
Right. I mean, my dad tells this story all the time when I see him, and it's going to sound horrible when I say it, and your heart's going to break a little bit, but I promise it's good. Like, he was like a government bureaucrat, and he hated his job for like years. Yeah. And I remember, like, when I was a kid, I would always look up and be like, Dad, I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want to be like you. Yeah. And he was like, oh, thank God, because like I don't want you to be like me. Like, that's why I'm doing this, so you don't have to be like me.
Right.
So I totally hear that. Now, if you can look back on your career and say, these are the things that I really did right, like going to conventions, or like to like move my career forward, like these things I would absolutely do again, because they were essential to my growth. What would you say those things would be?
Yeah, that would basically be where the day I just walked off the college campus. I mean, that was the beginning of and from there it was just following that dream. So I'd say at that point I was starting to do things right. So I'm not sure.
Because one of the things that you talked about a lot was like you seemed more. It wasn't just like going out and following your dreams. You seemed pretty like strategic about it. I mean, you were going to conventions in the early to mid '90s and showing your art around at a time when, like, it's not like there was 1,000 conventions back then.
Yeah, that's true. I remember my very first convention. That might have been 20, and it was in Portland, and I was in Seattle. So that was Dark Horse was there, and so that was a couple-hour trek. But yeah, I think that's something that's very necessary. I'm sure that's something that you do a lot, which is you have a game plan. Otherwise, how there's no way you could be publishing and running a comic book company any other way.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think that the idea of walking off a campus sounds super appealing, but then people say, well, just follow your dream, and it's like, it's more, to me it feels like when listening to your story, it's about following a dream and having like an end point or a destination in mind, and then being very strategic in how you went through. I mean, you didn't even just go to comic conventions. You went to comic conventions and tried to network and talk to like people who were doing the exact thing that you wanted to do.
Right, and I even purposely centered everything around my life around that desire, and so that meant what was the best job I could get that would allow me to get to where I want to go in the meantime. And that was like, well, security guard work, where I just sit behind a desk all night and and I can draw, or collecting unemployment once I got let go, and using that money to live as cheaply as possible, so I could spend all day drawing, and because it was like I knew I had to keep working at it and keep getting better. And people have, it could be deceptive if you just say, you just follow your dream, but that dream entails a lot of discipline and a lot of hard work, and it's not necessarily even just being happy. It's about, because a lot of that requires it does require a lot of sacrifice. It does require you to be, doing, being very disciplined and putting in the hours and just doing what you got to do.
I mean, another point that I thought when they were listening to was you were talking about when you were when Rick Holberg took you under his wing and you were too slow and you just ended up killing yourself to make sure that you were faster. I don't know, did that include doing 20-hour days or working weekends or, I mean, that can't have, and I mean, I don't know what they paid cleanup back then, but cleanup now is not a great paying job, so it couldn't have been for a huge amount of money that you were working. But you were still killing yourself because you knew that was a good next step in the path, right?
Yeah, it had nothing to do with what was reasonable or pay wise or hourly wise, or I mean I've seen people get into this business or try to get into this business and sort of be well, I want my weekends. I don't want to work more than 40 hours a week, or it's just this is the wrong profession. So it was really about a fierce desire to just do this for a living and just sort of do whatever I had to take to kind of get there. And that was and I didn't really have one of the sacrifices you make too, especially in that early stage where I think a lot of artists make that really go after it and have success, is there can be an imbalance for a while, and there was too, as far as your own personal relationships, and that stuff sort of came later. I sort of to kind of prioritize other elements of my life more as I became more successful and I got better and faster. But yeah, it definitely paid my dues for a number of years. Yeah.
Right, and I mean, it also shows a dogged perseverance when you work at a place like Now Comics that doesn't pay you, and then you work at, I don't know if they paid you at Saban when those two things went down, but I know it can't be easy to do a bunch of work and have it not see the light of day. Was there ever a moment where you were screw it, I just want to go back to Seattle and work as the security guard again and be mindless?
Yeah, well, with that Now comic stuff, all that comic book stuff happened while I was up there, but no, actually, for me, it was just there's no, it's I had to do this. There's no other choice. I wasn't. That thought never seriously came across my mind. Then as I was learning too, even showing my stuff around, sometimes your critics could come down on you really hard, but you have to have thick skin. You have to have that intense desire and that perseverance.
That's incredible, because I think about just letting it all go and getting a standard desk job today. I was thinking about this 2 hours before we were on the phone, about just daydreaming about how nice it would be to just get a paycheck for work served and be able to go home and plan a vacation, and so the fact that never came into your head is, again, it is awe-inspiring to me, because it comes in my head every day.
And there's nothing wrong with that either. It's just, we all as individuals, we have to just be true to ourselves, So and I don't know what would have happened if I just kept banging at the door and just not getting results. I think at some point, you do have to have, it's not just the desire and it's not just the hard work, and but I did have a number of setbacks. I would have people telling me that it's not something that I should do or was good enough to do. So I did have to struggle through a lot of that. But yeah.
Well, on top of that, it seems like you were very good at adapting to whatever the opportunity was. Yeah. Like when maybe the comics weren't working out and you got an opportunity to do cleanups, you were like, all right, at least it's art. And then you were ping pong back and forth to what the opportunity was, which I find is an incredibly important skill if you want to succeed in anything.
Yeah, and I think it's a kind of work ethic that benefits everyone too, where it's like whatever job that I was hired to do, I was going to pursue with excellence, so if it was whatever it was, if, whether it was something I was super excited about or not, I was going to give it my best shot.
All right. So last question before I talk about Navigon and then we wrap up. If somebody wanted to get into working at Young Justice or another show today, or they just wanted to get into animation, what would you tell them as like they needed in their portfolio, or like how should they go about something like that?
It seems like having a website is pretty important. I mean, when I was coming up, people were looking at physical portfolios. Now, if you have a website with your real, examples of your work, I think that's very helpful. And then look for opportunities to connect with people that are, in that business. People like myself. I don't have a lot of time to give to people, but if someone approaches me with at a convention or even on Facebook, and then they have a website and the right kind of enthusiasm, I'm happy to take a moment out and give them some pointers, or even suggest or show their work to other people that might be able to hire them potentially. So yeah.
All right, so let's go into talk. I will say before we talk about Navigon that I literally had no idea that you had any animation experience or anything until like maybe the last time we were at San Fernando Valley Comic-Con, maybe the time before, because what you talk about at these shows, and every time I've seen you at a show, is Navigon.
Yeah, and that's partly with my co-creator. He's behind that to some degree too. I mean, I'm there at the comic book show primarily for the book. Everything else is secondary to that when I'm there. That's what it's for. But my co-creator, he's got tons of experience in animation as well, and he just really wants it to be about the graphic novel, and he doesn't even, I don't think, as far as he's concerned, he doesn't even want to talk about his work in animation at all. And on my side, I was like, maybe I should use this to maybe help drum up a little more interest, because I have some fairly impressive credentials, and that's, I think at this last show you saw, I had some fan art self-produced fan art from shows I'd worked with at the table, and with a little placard kind of listing the shows I've worked on.
I don't know if it's fan art, if it's a character sheet from a character that you work on the show that you're currently working on.
Well, it's not a character sheet, but what's his name? The guy sitting next to me at the last con, Larry Houston. Yeah, he had character sheets. But mine actually is fan art. It's just like it just happens to be on shows I directed, and
and are a fan of. You
right. And I'm a fan myself, for sure. I'm not one of those guys. I never really understood that. I never understood creators who weren't seemingly fans of the stuff that they're working on. It's like, that seems kind of unfortunate. But I'm a huge fan. I grew up just devouring comic books, loving every genre, superheroes, sci-fi, horror. And I'm a geek at heart for sure.
Awesome. All right, so what is this book? Tell us about it, and hopefully I'm saying it correctly.
Navigon, yeah, it's sort of like an alliteration, I guess, of something called the Magabonian Tales. It's sort of an inspired epic fantasy that draws its influence from like Arthurian archetypes, Celtic mythology, sort of mixes it all together into this world that we created called Navigon. And Navigon, as we conceived it, is sort of like the wellspring of our own myths, that sort of we have a connection with through the realm of fairy, our world and this other world. And the story itself is a knight who's sort of like the leader of this medieval special forces group working for the king. Discovers that the king and everything that he believed in and knew is corrupt and evil, and sort of has to reevaluate his whole purpose of being, to fight against it.
And you've completed one volume, right? And is there more planned?
Oh, for sure. That's the part that I'm not sure we planned so well. Because if it was just one book, it may have taken us, years and years to kind of get to and produce with it, and it would be done. But really, this is we've tried to map it out so we could maybe get it done like in like 6 books that are of this, the same length. The book is 46 pages, I believe, or it could go much longer. But yeah, it's like the first chapter of a bigger, grander story.
Awesome. And okay, so here's where I'm gonna let you pitch the book, because you've given so much to our audience. I want you to, why should the people listening to this show, who are mostly all comic book fans, most of our audience is most of my fans are comic book fans, and they all are always looking for comic stuff, especially fantasy stuff. Why should they go out and buy this book?
Well, I think if you're a fan of that genre, and like one of the biggest inspirations for us was the movie Excalibur, and then what else has there really been since then? There's been, some attempts. I guess, there in more.
I think there was another.
Right, there
movie
was.
Recently,
it was incredibly bombastic and very much in the vein of a Guy Ritchie movie. So yeah, I know it got horrible reviews. I saw it, and I love King Arthur's, the whole mythology of it, and I'm pretty familiar with it. But it was pretty entertaining. So I guess there's a little bit more of that stuff, in recent years than there was. But I'd say that's one thing. I mean, it's beautifully drawn. It's got that romantic fantasy. Knights in armor. It's got a tragic love story. It's got a lot of passion, forces of good and evil. So if that's something that you crave more of, then that's sort of what we're here to serve.
Yeah, so for all the people that watched the King Arthur movie and were like, why can't they just make another like good King Arthur type thing?
Yeah.
Like, this is that book, right? This is what you're trying, like a space you're trying to fill?
Yeah, it really vibes off of kind of an obsession of that Excalibur movie. When I hadn't had a lot of interest really, in the King Arthur mythology, or even the previous attempts to portray it until then. Although I loved fantasy, and I loved I love the whole concept and ideas of like fairy realms and that connection to that kind of that Irish Celtic mythology. But this thing came along and it was just so raw and primal and passionate. It's just so grand, and that's sort of the thing that fed us creatively.
Awesome. I love it. And the book is amazing, and we're going to have a link in the show notes. If they want to, so I'm going to give you the last question. You can take either the last question or the part about wherever you can find you first. It doesn't matter to me. But you can either give us a piece of advice that you haven't given yet, or reiterate a piece of advice you've already given for the people that have just been dozing off the whole time because they're like working. A lot of our fans or a lot of our listeners are artists. They're listening to this in the background while they draw, and this is your chance to give like one final piece of parting advice that these people need to wake up and take.
Right. If I would say, if you have a little bit of talent, the thing that's really going to carry you through is the hard work, the dedication, the passion, and to some degree, succeeding as an artist over the long haul is kind of analogous to being the last man standing, right? So, and I've seen that. I mean, I've been a professional for over 20 years at this point. And you just keep at it, and you'll see people fall by the wayside, give up. But if you just kind of continue to go after it, if you're disciplined about it, if you apply all the things that you should be applying in your life, in other areas besides art. I mean, it's just like if you want success in life, no matter what field you're trying to get into or what you're trying to do or achieve, a lot of those same things apply. And it's, don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect it to be always fun. There's a lot of tedium, honestly, to doing what we do. And I'm sure you could speak on that as well. I'd just say, the passion and the hard work, that'll get you there as much or even more than the amount of talent that you have.
A friend of mine once told me a story. Maybe like 10 years ago, and he'd been doing this for a long time, and he said, Russell, when I first started, everybody wanted to be an artist. Everybody wanted, I think it was a screenwriter. Everyone wanted to be a screenwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And like there were tons of competition that had equal skill that I had. And and then every year I would look back, and there were less and less people. There were more people that became bankers and insurance agents, and suddenly 10 years later, a lot of breaks started happening to me because I was one of a very few amount of people who stayed and had the amount of skill that I had. And then even more people started falling off in 11 and 12. And by the time I got to 20 years doing this, I looked back, and there was almost nobody that I was in competition with anymore because nobody had been doing this as long as I had. And nobody had the skills that
That's
I had.
cool, and that's true. One more thing, if I could add one more thing that's important to that as well. And through all that, I think, and this is something I feel like I've seen defeat a lot of guys, especially the ones that have been doing it for a long time. As they get older, I think it's very important to do whatever you have to do mentally to maintain a positive attitude, right? So if you can maintain that positive, it's because it's very easy to become like jaded in this business, because for a variety of factors, just for the amount you have to sacrifice, for just everything that it requires, for, maybe having to do jobs you don't necessarily want to do from time to time, or just being, feeling like you're taken advantage of in various situations. But really just trying to look at that glass as half full as opposed to half empty. I know that's kind of a cliched, or seem like a platitude, but it's important, and it's one of the things that will carry you through.
There's a reason that cliches become cliches, because there's a nugget of wisdom in them usually.
Right.
All right. So, people want to buy Navigon or connect with you online. How can they do that?
Well, I set up. I haven't. Right now, the best way to buy a copy of Navigon, because we only printed up 500 copies based on our Kickstarter. And maybe we've sold or we've given away as rewards or sold maybe 100 of those so far, is to come to one of our convention appearances, and we're selling it there in person. That's probably the best way. I have a online bookstore that you can go to, that I haven't checked in a while. Yep, and it's still up. I haven't sold much there though, but you can go there and you can order it online. It's at Navigon.com, Mabigon.com, and you can order a book directly from me there.
Awesome. Any Twitter, Instagram, Facebook?
Yes, you can type in Navigon on Facebook, and we have a Facebook page there that gives updates and behind the scenes and artwork and all sorts of goodies on there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Vinton, for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it, and you have a great day.
You too, man.
So that was Vinton Heuck, and man, I am pretty bummed that the audio was so shitty on my side in that episode. You'd think I could figure this fucking thing out. It's only a couple of settings and a microphone. But the good news is that it was a great episode, and Vinton brought the thunder. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go head on over and purchase Navigon or join its Facebook page, and just let Vinton know how much you appreciated it. And don't forget to tune in to Young Justice Season 3 when it airs on Netflix later, I assume this year. Actually, I don't know when it airs. If you like this episode, please head over to iTunes and like, review, and subscribe today. And if you haven't joined our Facebook group, you can do that by going to writingandsellingcommunity.com. It's a good thing. And that's it, wannabes and creators. I will see you next time.